The battle had already been won. Israel had defeated the enemy in the valley. Joshua had led the men. The desert was silent, and in that moment of complete victory, God spoke. Not to celebrate, not to congratulate, but to declare something no one expected. Write this as a memorial in a book. I will completely blot out the name of Amalek from under heaven. And then, the Lord will be at war against Amalek from generation to generation. Not until the next battle, not until the next victory, from generation to generation, forever. Stop. The Egyptians had enslaved Israel for centuries. Generations born in chains, children massacred on Pharaoh's orders. No declaration like this. The Babylonians burned Jerusalem to the ground, destroyed the temple, carried an entire people into exile. No declaration like this. The Assyrians erased 10 tribes from history. No declaration like this. Why Amalek? Why forever? Why this nation and not the others? By the end of this investigation, you will discover that this was never simply a war against a nation. It was a war against something far older and far more dangerous. The name Amalek conjures an image, a distant enemy, a foreign civilization, a people from somewhere far away. But the text of Genesis reveals something that changes that image entirely. Amalek was the son of Eliphaz. Eliphaz was the son of Esau, and Esau was the twin brother of Jacob, the father of the 12 tribes of Israel. The same man, the same bloodline, the same ancestor. The Amalekites were not strangers who arrived from the edges of the known world. They were cousins, descended from the same grandfather as the people they would spend centuries fighting. This was not a conflict between two civilizations that had never met. It was something far closer, a war within the same family, two branches from the same root that had taken radically different directions. But that still doesn't answer the question. Why would God declare eternal war against cousins? Israel had just left Egypt, hundreds of thousands of people moving through the desert. No organized army, no military training, no battle formation. Former slaves discovering freedom for the first time weeks out of Egypt. Entire families in motion. The elderly, women, children, the sick. Those who no longer had the strength to keep pace with the rest. And it was at this exact moment that Amalek attacked. But not from the front. The Book of Deuteronomy preserves the detail that defines everything. They attacked you on the journey when you were faint and weary, and they cut off all who were lagging behind. They did not challenge the strongest. They did not confront the army in formation. They hunted the ones at the back, the exhausted, the broken, the ones who had fallen behind because their bodies had given out, the ones who had no way to defend themselves. And the text adds one final detail. They did this without any fear of God. This was not a battle. It was a predation. And that phrase, without any fear of God, is not a military observation. It is a moral verdict. But is this enough to explain a war declared forever? The question is still open. Centuries pass. Israel now has a king. His name is Saul, the first monarch of the Hebrew people, a man from the tribe of Benjamin, chosen by God himself. And one day, the prophet Samuel arrives with a message. He reminds Saul of what Amalek did in the desert, the attack on the weak, the calculated predation, the deliberate choice to strike without fear of God. And he delivers the order. Saul must march against the Amalekites, destroy them completely, everything, no exceptions. Saul marches, he fights, he wins a total military victory. And then, in the moment of victory, he makes a decision. he spares the king of the Amalekites, a man named Agag. He also keeps the best livestock, the fattest sheep, the strongest cattle, everything that had value. What was worthless he destroys, but the best he keeps. When Samuel arrives, Saul greets him with confidence. "I have carried out the Lord's instructions." Samuel stops. "What then is this bleating of sheep in my ears? What is this lowing of cattle that I hear?" Saul explains. The people kept the best livestock to offer as a sacrifice, a generous intention, spoken with the language of devotion. And Samuel responds with words that define everything that follows. "Does the Lord delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as much as in obeying the voice of the Lord? To obey is better than sacrifice." That day, Saul loses his kingdom, not because of murder, not because of open rebellion, not because of flagrant idolatry, because of incomplete obedience. A decision that looked almost right, almost generous, but not quite. Samuel executes Agag with his own hands. The episode closes, and it would seem that the story of Amalek is finally over. But there is something the text does not say, something the narrative structure of the Bible will reveal generations later. Agag survived longer than he should have, and those extra days carried consequences no one in that moment could have imagined. Generations pass, Jerusalem falls, the temple burns, the Hebrew people are scattered across the known world. We are now inside the Persian Empire, and in that empire, a man rises to power. His name is Haman, prime minister to the most powerful king in the world. The text of Esther introduces him with a genealogical detail that, in light of everything we have just seen, is not there by accident. Haman is identified as an Agagite, a descendant of Agag, the same Agag that Saul had chosen to spare, that Samuel had finally executed, but perhaps not before the line continued. Stop. The man who designs a plan to exterminate every Jewish person in the 127 provinces of the Persian Empire, from India to Ethiopia, may be the direct product of a moment of hesitation, of an obedience granted halfway, of a king who had almost done what he was asked, but not completely. If Saul had obeyed entirely, Agag would not have survived. And if Agag had not survived, Haman the Agagite might never have existed. The war God declared from generation to generation had just crossed centuries to reappear in the palace of the most powerful king in the world. But the Bible never leaves an irony half-built. The man who will expose Haman's plot, who will stand before the king at the risk of his own life, who will save his people from extinction, is named Mordecai. And Mordecai is from the tribe of Benjamin, the same tribe as Saul. As if in the narrative structure of the Bible, the tribe that had made the foundational error was also the one God chose to repair its consequences generations later. Esther intercedes, the plot is uncovered, and Haman is hanged on the very gallows he had built for Mordecai. The people are saved. But a victory that might never have been necessary if centuries earlier a king had not decided to obey halfway. Now, we have to face the question that careful readers cannot avoid. The order given to Saul, destroy completely, no exceptions. How does an honest reader approach this command? Whether a believer or not, this passage demands more than silence. There are several serious readings. The first is historical and contextual. This command was given in a specific context, to a specific people, in a singular historical situation that does not repeat itself. Many scholars understand it as a military and spiritual instruction, tied to one particular moment in Israel's history, not a universal principle applicable across all times and places. The second is theological. In the religious thought of the ancient world, certain forms of spiritual corruption were understood as so deeply rooted that radical separation was necessary to protect the integrity of a people in formation. Not ethnic hatred, but a response to what the text describes as an absolute and deliberate resistance to divine mercy. The third is the reading of progressive revelation. What was commanded in an earlier context is fulfilled, transformed, and in many ways surpassed in the New Testament. The same God, a revelation that advances. What can be said with certainty is that no serious biblical tradition uses this text to justify any form of violence today. The question is difficult, and it is precisely because it is difficult that it deserves to be asked honestly, rather than avoided for comfort. Why would God declare war against one nation forever? Look at the pattern across the centuries. In the desert, Israel had just been born as a people, fragile, disorganized, still learning what freedom meant, and Amalek struck. Under Saul, Israel had just received its monarchy, a new institution, a new identity, a new chapter in the story of the promise, and the remnant of Amalek returned. Under Esther, Israel was scattered across an empire, without a land, without a temple, without visible protection, and a man bearing the name of Agag moved to finish what had begun in the desert. The pattern is not random. Amalek did not simply become the enemy of the weak. In the biblical story, Amalek becomes the recurring image of every force that strikes God's promise when it appears most vulnerable. In the wilderness, under Israel's first king, in exile, generation after generation, always the same moment, always when the future seemed most fragile, always when the promise appeared least protected. The war that began in the desert was never about destroying one nation. It was about confronting every force that rose against God's promise every time that promise appeared weakest, generation after generation.